Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special edition of the In Conversation podcast, brought to you in collaboration with authors and healthcare professionals. I'm again joined by Doctors Rupal, Shah and Foell, who are the authors of Intellect's forthcoming book, Fighting for the Soul of General Practice, The Algorithm Will See You Now. We are also very excited to be joined today by two eminent guests who are going to offer some international perspectives. I have Iona Heath, ex-president of the Royal College of General Practitioners, authored books including Matters of Life and Death, Key Writings, and The Mystery of General Practice. We also have Victor Montori with us today. Victor is a professor of medicine at the Mayo Clinic in the US and head of the Patient Revolution movement. He has long advocated for kind and careful. So we'll be discussing some of these points today and some of the expertise that you guys are bringing to the table. So thank you all for joining us. And this is the third in a series of podcasts, but it is fantastic to have these more international perspectives in today's show. To begin with, I would like to ask the guests if they see parallels between the problems that are currently faced by the National Health Service in the UK and those that are also currently faced by other systems around the world. So is there an essential problem, or is this more of a systemic problem that's particular to the National Health Service? And I think to begin with, I'd like to bring in Victor for this one. Do you have any perspective on that, Victor?
Well, I do. When I wrote the book, Why We Revolt, I had 2 points of view to build that on. One was the Peruvian healthcare system where I trained, and the other one was the U.S. healthcare system where I practiced. One of the revelations that the book allowed me to see was that I was describing a global phenomenon. And the global phenomenon, I think, can be summarized described by saying, in brief, we are moving healthcare into an industrialized approach where people are processed through, where relationships are considered inefficient, where person-centeredness is simply the collection of data from each patient, including their patient-reported outcomes and measures, and the things done to them rather than with them, limiting the ability of clinicians by distractions, interruptions, disruptions, and hurry, limiting the ability of clinicians to notice each person and to respond to each person in their full problematic situation and with continuity of relationship over time. So by eliminating all of that, or by devaluing it, the first victim of that globally is care, and the second one is the practice of general practice, the practice of primary care, which is based on these fundamental things, and the replacement of that very slowly, I think, the replacement of care with the processing of people using technical means and abandoning the value of ongoing relationships as a means of healing people and helping them flourish. So I think it's a global phenomenon. It just manifests with its own characteristics in different places, characteristics that demonstrate perhaps old commitments to solidarity and to care for each other, as in the NHS, for instance, or in places like Canada, or it manifests new commitments to the privatization, the industrialization, the technification of care. So I think it's a global issue.
Thank you, Victor. That's very insightful. And Iona, do you have a different perspective as someone who's perhaps worked inside the NHS and also has spent a lot of time abroad?
I think Julian Tudor-Hart used to argue that Britain always followed the most expensive, most unequal, least efficient health service in the world at a gap of about 20 years. And I think that has largely been fulfilled. Sadly, Julian hasn't lived to see it fulfilled, which is probably a good thing for Julian. But the other thing that really struck me this week is, I don't know if anybody else read it, but I love football. Not everybody loves football. But there was an article in The Guardian about footballers earlier this week, saying about the damage that all the data they collect on footballers, how it's potentially damaging their performance. So footballers are now judged on how far they run, how many passes they complete, how many tackles they make, endless data that they produce. And this article was about why is Liverpool top of the Premier League at the moment? And they were arguing that it's because Klopp is less of a technocrat and will put his arms around players if he thinks that that actually the emotions of playing and the emotions of sport are really, really important. And I thought, God, this is exactly the same as general practice. We're all judged on our data. It's as the book shows, it's a constant stream of moral injury coming out of computers. And, I think what is so wonderful about Ru and Jens's book is that you show us what the job still is, despite all this, but how much better it could be. So, you're the Klopp of general practice literature.
I'm definitely practicing heavy metal general practice. Today I had 4 home visits. I'm very passionate. Yes.
Yes. Home visits just such a privilege, such a wonder. I still remember so many so clearly.
I love that analogy, the beautiful game. And I guess also to hark back to the Americanization, I guess, if you will, of the National Health Service that you kind of alluded to in a way as well. It's almost a bit like the stats from American football of kind of influencing the beautiful game of soccer, football. And it's a similar thing, but it sounds a bit from what you were alluding to with this 20-year catching up, the NHS is with the systems in place.
Who knows what the beautiful game will be like in 20 years' time if that is. It'll only be played virtually, not in real. Yeah.
Well, definitely playing for a different audience. So the take would be you have to gamify what you're doing because you're judged by the statistics, and that's for us our key performance statistics. How much time we spend with patients, how many growth points we have, and you say yes, that has to be done because our efficiency has to be measured, and therefore you have to have these figures in there. Of course, everybody will agree that it doesn't measure what it cannot measure. How do you measure a good death, for example? And you would measure it, probably the outcome would change after 2 years or 5 years. And combining these intangibles with tangible data, that's our daily job. I would like to link this to communist regimes, to Eastern Germany, for example, where we had 5-year plans, targets, and in a way, 2 worlds, the world as it should be and the world as portrayed by the party. And you have 2 realities. And John Lorna said the same about the NHS, that you have the NHS as it should be, or as we portray it in teaching and research, and the ideal NHS, and then the black humor and the gallows humor and so forth of as it really is.
I think it was the love, and I will use that word deliberately, the love of general practice that prompted, I think, Jens and me to want to write the book in the first place.
Absolutely.
It's a privilege. It's a mystery. It's a privilege for things that people tell you, the connections that you can make, and it just has been completely exasperating. I've been in the same practice for 18 years, but to have none of that valued. In fact, you have to sort of be creatively subversive, again, as John would say, in order to maintain the relational care. It has to be under the radar, and that doesn't feel like a comfortable way for things to be.
Because Victor and I wrote about the need for the promoting continuity could be the subversive activity for medicine in this 21st century. So I would like to take subversion and put it in a sort of unacceptable category, because I think it's always a route to some sort of freedom, and I think that's what you're saying. Being committed to subverting the worst aspects of it, which I think you both are, it is a very noble endeavour. It doesn't feel good, and it doesn't get you points, but I'm sure your patients appreciate it.
I would like to, James, if you let me build on these football analogy and the statistics and the algorithm will see you now aspect of Jensen Rue's book. I think there's another angle to that, which is that as managers take over and industrialize healthcare, they require guaranteed outcomes. And so when you are a manager of a football team, you would like to look at the stats of your team, of your players, and optimize that statistical mix to try to guaranteed success for your team. And then, of course, you jump on the pitch, and then all bets are off, which is what makes the game to some extent beautiful. But it's also what makes the mystery of care. What feeds the mystery of care is the fact that every encounter, like every romantic encounter, like every encounter between people where people are making themselves vulnerable to some extent, it's an adventure. There's a risk associated with that. There is no guaranteed outcome, and that is intolerable for industrialized healthcare. And so the effort of bringing technology into it now, so we're going to see now the connection between the industrialization, which is a 20th century and early 21st century movement in healthcare, now bounded up with the technologization of care through artificial intelligence and other means, which are going to be adopted not because they make more room for care, which is what is being said, but because they will guarantee outcomes. And this guarantee of outcomes is a complete mirage. It is a massive distraction, but it's incredibly compelling because it reduces costs of operation if you guarantee the outcomes, and it improves those outcomes, that we are measured on. And what is being completely left out as a massive blind spot in all this is that it destroys, undermines, and marginalizes care. And if care is not the main purpose of healthcare, then what is it? And so I think I will bring that analogy together to say, there is going to be the need to guarantee outcomes, and rather than being evidence-based and see that if you want great outcomes for healthcare, you have to have a very strong relationship-based primary care infrastructure to have the best outcomes at the lowest cost, turns out. Instead of doing that, we're going to instead invest heavily in technology that pretends to guarantee outcomes when that is in fact a massive ignorance of what the mystery of interpersonal care and healing is about.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just going to bring you in, Iona, just to say that something that you mentioned in the patient Earth is Sick opinion piece that you wrote last year regarding education, really, which I think links in with this. It seems that the notion of the human and humanity is being removed from medical education, so that we're going to have a generation of GPs entering the profession who are being further distanced from the patient as human. And is that part of the root of the problem? And do we need to fundamentally address the issues at the educational stage for early career general practitioners? Because Pandora's box is open when it comes to technology, and tricky to resolve some of those issues. But would this maybe be something that we can try to tackle at the educational level for the next generation?
I think it is, but I think we also need to have confidence in young people. And I think as soon as you sit a doctor in a room with a patient, just as a dyad, the magic starts to happen, as Victor said, and all the uncertainty that surrounds those sort of interactions, and all the wonder and actually all the joy is in those. And I think young people don't need to be exposed to very much to realize that. But what they do need is support in the early years, that they're not going mad, that the system is crazy, they aren't, and their own feelings and their own experience has much more to teach them than any analysis of data or QOF points or anything like that. And I think we see that with each generation, that they pick up on that magic. The majority of them do, but I think it's that sort of wonder that is there to be experienced and taken. And if teachers can support students and young doctors through those processes, then I do not lose hope. So I think there are always reasons for hope, and that runs through Ru and Jens's book too.
The reason I write it in large part, Iona, to a rallying cry, to kind of be able to articulate what we're noticing, what we all feel, this embodied emotion we all feel as clinicians, but which is sort of crowded out. That's all I can say, because the number of targets and audits and kind of investigations, everything is just getting more and more. And this kind of fear that we're getting it wrong, that the mirage that Victor alluded to, that if you just get it right and you at all the investigations, all the tests, you don't miss anything, then people are going to live forever. And I think that fear is very real. And so really we wanted to write this book to voice something about the meaning of our work that I think is we're very distracted at the moment in all sorts of ways. And I think fear is one of the distractions.
It's always the distraction, and fear. My big fear would be living forever. Can you imagine anything more ghastly? So that's another aspect of fear. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a wonderful book in that way, that you managed to communicate that and put it so clearly, and yet not just be gloomy and miserable, but to keep.
Gloomy and miserable seems to be my calling card, so I presume this is my jumping in point. But I think I have to agree with Iona that I too share her trust in that new generations can see clearly through this and reinvest themselves in caring for themselves, caring for their community, and caring for the planet. I think these are all connected commitments that I think a movement for care emphasizes. But the gloomy part comes on what we put in front of them as they're forming their ideas of what going into care, going into medicine, going into healthcare is. Because if we keep advertising to them that the profession is about the business of it, the industry of it, the technology of it, the getting it right with precision and using the genetics and using all these information, this cloud of data to get it right, and using the artificial intelligence and all that, if that's what they see and that's what they think is about, the kinds of people that are going to gravitate towards a profession medicine will be dramatically different than the kinds of people that would have done it if they had seen, say, Iona practice in her environment, going into those patients' homes, noticing the stickiness of the floor as a measure of to what extent people are able to self-care and so forth. It's a different kind of person. Now, once you get the right kind of people in, exposing them to like inspiring message of Ru and Jen's book makes sense, because then they can see that they're, like says, they're not crazy. The system is broken, and they need to be supported so they can mobilize their own courage to actually make their own hope through the actions of care.
Fascinating stuff. Ru, did you want to jump in there, especially with connection to the book and to your rationale behind writing it?
Yeah, what Victor and Iona say just so strongly resonates. We've got huge attrition in the NHS as well. It's not necessarily to biotechnology, but Victor, people just leave. They enter general practice, and we just can't stem the flow of attrition. And there's a reason for that. And I agree that it's something about missing the point, missing the sort of not valuing the mystery, the kind of beauty of that connection, and invalidating it. Now, I'm very interested, and I love what you wrote about sufficiency and this concept of enough is enough. And I wonder, Victor mentioned that there's a link between all of these things: sustainability, kind and careful care, relationships. And I wondered if you wanted to talk more about what you see the link as being?
Yes, it's back to follow the money, isn't it? I mean, all the bad things come from the manipulation of money, but the pharmaceutical. I mean, I'm going to be gloomy now. The pharmaceuticalisation of the planet, reincarnating doctors as drug pushers, the amount of pharmaceuticals circulating in the environment, turning doctors just into apparatchiks who will deliver drugs on the basis of guidelines. I mean, this is all the worst nightmare side of what you're still living through. But again, the reason for optimism and what I was trying to do in that lecture and then that paper is that young people are so engaged in the predicament of the planet, and that if we can come at it that way and talk to them about the amount of pharmaceuticals that is on a what's it curve, it's absolutely terrifying the amount of pharmaceuticals in rivers around the world. And that if we find the magic and the communication and the love within ordinary practice, then prescribing rates go down, because you don't need to prove you're a doctor by prescribing all the time. You can have just as much effect by listening and doing all the things that we all know how to do. So I think that's the reason for optimism. I think it's absolutely, and I now say, whenever I get a chance to speak to young doctors, I say, I'm sorry, we have totally messed it up, and you are going to have to, cut this reliance on pharmaceuticals, because the planet isn't going to survive it if it isn't turned around. And a lot follows from that if you have a commitment to reduce pharmaceuticals. And I think, again, we can get some campaigning from young people along these lines. It would help if the NHS paid them a decent salary rather than much less than we got when I was young, proportionately.
We'll be pleased to hear that as program director here, we are doing a lot about deprescribing or link the practice of medicine to practicing greener, which means often not prescribing and not seeing, not pharmaceuticalizing every action. So I think there's a lot going on, and you can do quite a lot in teaching and practicing the magic of medicine, which is always there. It's archaic and is essential.
Yeah, there is, of course, the fact that the health service itself, as it grows, to meet the growing needs of people. So that's the other aspect of this. People need more and more healthcare because the quality of life, of living, is deteriorating under an economic and political model that does not elevate the flourishing of people to be the main goal of our communities and societies. And so healthcare gets to pick up for a significant amount of suffering that is put on people by policies that are massively misguided in terms of their objectives. And so it is no surprise that healthcare wants to grow, and as it grows, it pollutes directly and indirectly. And so there's obviously an important. Now, there's an interesting thing. NHS has to be the world global leader in healthcare sustainability. I do not know of any organization that has such consistent messaging and action in relation to reducing its own emissions and carbon footprint. The global problem, to me, extends beyond environmental sustainability, as important and critical as it is to the sustainability of life itself, to also the issue that we spend a lot of time talking about the economic sustainability of healthcare. We can't afford, we can't pay, we can't, all these things that we cannot do, and then we turn around and invest billions in bombing somebody or whatever. It's the other side of that is the human sustainability of healthcare. This issue that Iona and Ru and Jens have mentioned repeatedly, which is the fact that we're burning through people who have made their life's commitment to care for others. And that, as a society, is fundamentally cruel. Yeah. And so we need to figure out a way of not only working on the environmental sustainability of healthcare, the economic sustainability of our investments in healthcare, but also on the human sustainability. We cannot toss out nurses and physicians and therapists and other people who have made a commitment to care for their fellow human and find that doing that job burns through their soul. That is completely unacceptable, and we need to work on those three levels of sustainability.
I think that's a really, really interesting point, and I think one that will resonate a lot with a general listener who maybe isn't familiar with general practice to the level that you all are. I think that notion about human resources and how that they're finite, and that we're burning through people who spend their whole lives dreaming about becoming medical healthcare professionals, and then it gets beaten out of them and they leave the profession or go into pharmaceuticals or something similar.
I think these points are so important. The link between human sustainability and the sustainability of the planet, and kind of reconfiguring, reimagining what we're trying to achieve through our healthcare systems. All of this has come up today, and I think they're all very interlinked and kind of fundamental. And medicine's definitely
wonderfully described in your book, and is wonderfully described in your book, and is wonderfully addressed in your book. And I think people should read it and take it very, very seriously, because it's if we don't fundamentally address this, not only are we not going to have much of a planet to be with, but when we get sick, we're going to be processed. And then, of course, if we cannot contribute to the outcomes that the system will want, we're going to be tossed. And we don't want that.
No, I don't think anybody wants to live forever. I agree with Iona. It'd be ghastly. I do want someone to listen to me, and I want to know that it's someone I know and trust who will have those difficult conversations with me. And I think it's just not all about prolonging life to the last nanosecond, regardless of the quality of that life.
I was just thinking it might be really, really nice for you all to think maybe about something we could change it practically in the system, or that we can practically sabotage, if you will, and maybe some of the things how that might relate to the book, of course, as well. Ru, Jens, do you want to maybe start things off? Is there anything about this system that you can see we can take hold of it and we can affect change, practically or philosophically?
For me, I think we need to change the targets. I think targets are fine. But I think a lot of the targets should be around relationships, continuity of care. Stuart Mercer's wonderful care measure about how patients feel whether they feel that they're listened to, kind of seen and heard properly and paid attention to. So I think if we were rewarded along those lines, that would make a big difference.
I'm going back to Jürgen Klopp. That he
very German.
Yeah, of course, and he comes from nearby where I'm from.
Okay.
Yes, he's very, very good in mobilizing emotions, but that doesn't mean that he's not using technology. And he was one of the first in Germany who had research-informed training methods, etc. So in a way, I'm dreaming of ways of bringing technology, management, and the essence of care together. It doesn't need to be an antagonism. So I want to be closer to managers. I'm dreaming about a way of working together, bringing patients, managers, technology, and clinicians in a system that doesn't terrorize everybody. So it's pipe dreaming, but there are ways to integrate technology to the benefit of our lives. That's something at least I'm pursuing on a local level.
Well, I've written that what we need is a wholesale revolution. So this idea of if we can just fix this little thing or that other thing. I mean, I like Ruth and Jen's view on this, and I do believe that everybody that goes into healthcare, at least at some point or another, went into it to help other people, managers, clinicians. We have that common. I think still have that common commitment. It's just that we are swimming in an ocean that requires or values a different set of values that turn out to interfere with care. And so in our movement, we have care activists, and that each one at the local level is invited to and supported in creating us a mini revolt, where we encourage them to identify some aspect of their experience that makes care difficult and to work with those around them to try to fundamentally change it. And then what we do is we learn about what they did and we tell the world so that others can gain courage from that experience and try their hand locally to do the same. And I think if we can continue to ignite a global movement for care that aligns ourselves with movements to care for the environment, that as I said, to make the economies more sustainable and more fair and more based on solidarity rather than on greed, that we can then see those values also appear in the healthcare system. Doing it the other way around, developing a revolution for care from the healthcare system seems a lot harder. And then to expect individuals to be heroes. In other words, in my practice, I am going to be careful, despite the environment, is to commit them to abandoning healthcare altogether in a premature way, burning themselves out. The same thing with patients saying, "Oh, I'll advocate for myself." Good luck. That just doesn't get you far enough. So my source of hope is the possibility that books like Ruth and Jen's and other efforts, the writings of Iona, and what we can do, that all of this creates the cultural milieu, the new ideas that then find opportunity to manifest themselves into an unstoppable commitment, global commitment to care for and about each other, our communities, our environment. So I wish I could say, if we just changed this one thing, but I'm a strong. My hope comes from action, and I think the action that I'm calling for is a wholesale global action for care.
You're suggesting changing one thing; it just happens to be the whole system. So, I think you answered my question quite effectively.
I'm not suggesting changing the healthcare system. I'm changing the wholesale system that I'm talking about. It's a little bit broader than that, James. I think I'm talking about the philosophical. The values that seem to inspire mainstream economics and mainstream politics, which is a winner takes all. There are losers, and it's okay that they're losers, and that disease, if you have the means to correct them, can be survived and you can live forever. Those values, call them neoliberal, call them whatever, are killing the planet, are killing healthcare, are injuring our clinicians, and are not helping us live fulfilling lives. So if you want me to go upstream, I'm going further upstream than the healthcare system.
Change the world.
The entire system, as it were.
Yeah.
If just very quickly before I hand over to Iona, if anyone wants to kind of maybe read a little bit more around some of these ideas that you're presenting today, Victor, is there maybe a website or a book that you might want to highlight that?
Oh yes. So our work is reflected in patientrevolution.org, and within that there are a number of ways forward to participate, become a fellow, become a care activist, read Why We Revolt. The best part of that book is on the outside, where there's a quote from Iona. So that is the best part of the book, but the rest of the book is acceptable, and it summarizes some of the work some of the thinking that we did a few years back, and unfortunately, it's time for a new book. So that's.
And Iona, would you like to follow that?
Well, no, you can't follow that. But I'm just going to the other extreme. I'm going to think of a few, small interventions which would feel huge. I think that QOF should be abolished in England as it has been in Scotland. It doesn't, in no way does it model what Jens is describing as a good mix of the human, the technological, and the whatever else. It should just go. It's been a failure for 20 years or more, 30 probably. And I think the other thing is that we need to propose that inflicting moral injury is unacceptable in the workplace. It should be like sexual harassment, things that are just going on all the time, and then suddenly people turn around and go, this is completely unacceptable, this is not going to continue. And I think the infliction of moral injury on people working at the bottom tier of the health service, trying to care for the most vulnerable in the population, should be regarded as that sort of level of crime almost. I mean, it is completely unacceptable. It's not yet recognised as such, certainly within our system or any system I know of, but it needs to move in that direction.
And while we have you, perhaps you might want to draw attention to any resources or to a book or to a website or anything that you think our listeners might be interested in following up on some of the ideas discussed today.
Oh, well, I'm specialising in lectures in memory of dead white men. So that one was in memory of Per Fugeli, who was a great friend, who was the professor of social medicine in Oslo. And I've just done one. Well, in the autumn, I did one in memory of Ian McWhinney called Quality of Mind, and that's been published in the Canadian Family Physician. And picking up on the work of people, the extraordinary work of people now dead. And another dead white man is John Berger, and I'm just completing a book about reading John Berger in a series from the OUP, Oxford University Press, and I enjoyed writing it. So I hope other people will too, because I learned a huge amount from the author of A Fortunate Man and everything else.
Well, Victor, Iona, thank you very much. And I just wanted to ask Ru, Jens, do you have any final questions for our guest or any final thoughts you might want to share today?
No, it's been a complete privilege, and just thank you very much, everybody here.
Thanks for writing the book, Ru and Jens.
Well, and as wonderful as the contributions of Iona and Victor are, I think we should also celebrate our authors, Rupal and Jens here, whose book is absolutely tremendous. And Fighting for the Soul of General Practice will be published on January 22nd of this year. And we're very excited to get that out into the marketplace and to get into libraries and bookshops around the world. But thank you for your contributions. And thank you so much, all of you, for joining me today. It's been really insightful, and I've certainly learned a lot. And it's kind of these and the other podcasts in this special series on healthcare that we've been running has really sort of changed my perspective on the system and the systemic problems, and really given me some food for thought. And I'm sure that many people out there who are listening to this will have the same revelations as well. So thank you all, very much appreciated.